He followed every rule, smiled politely, and waited his turn. But all it took was one glance for her to decide he didn't belong. What she didn't know was who his father was and what he would do next. The morning chill still lingered in the suburbs of Chicago even as sunlight filtered softly through the trees. Inside a modest two-story house, 12-year-old Cairo Bennett sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his zip-out black backpack. His mom was in the kitchen, quietly preparing breakfast, while his father had just finished an early conference call, his deep voice echoing faintly from the living room. Today wasn't just another day, it was the day. Cairo would be flying solo for the very first time to California for a 2-week tech camp his father had quietly helped sponsor. This wasn't just any camp. It was the camp one that kids from elite schools dreamed of attending. And Cairo, he was the only one from his school invited. He carried not just his family's hopes, but the pride of a whole community. Inside his bag were headphones, a sketch pad, a small pouch of snacks his mom had packed the night before, and tucked between the pages of his sketchbook, a letter carefully folded by her hands. He hadn't read it yet, but something told him it held every ounce of love she couldn't quite say out loud. They left home at 6 a.m. sharp. Cairo sat quietly in the back seat, watching the world pass by in soft morning blur. His father, Malcolm Bennett, drove with focused eyes fixed on the road. His mother rode up front, occasionally turning her head to offer a smile through the rearview mirror, as if that alone could settle the anxious flutter in Cairo's chest. As the car wound through familiar streets past the corner store, where he bought snacks after school, past the quiet library where he sketched robots that lived only on paper, he felt like he was leaving behind a piece of himself. His neighborhood looked small this morning, like it had shrunk overnight. At the airport, they moved through security effortlessly. Malcolm knew every shortcut, every efficient step. At the gate, they paused at a small coffee stand. His mother hugged him tight, pressing her face to his shoulder like she was memorizing the shape of him. "Don't forget to look out the window," she whispered. "You'll see the mountains. It'll feel like flying over a painting." His father's embrace was shorter, firmer. A hand on the shoulder, a steady nod. "You know the rules. You'll be fine." Cairo watched them walk away, clutching his boarding pass like a promise. He arrived at gate 34 40 minutes early. The waiting area was only half full. An elderly woman knitting quietly, a group of professionals typing furiously on laptops, a young couple with a toddler balancing a juice box. It was calm, predictable. Cairo chose a seat by the window, resting his backpack on his lap, arms wrapped around it like a quiet shield. The sun had climbed higher, casting golden stripes across the tarmac. Planes taxied in the distance. Everything looked like it was unfolding just as planned. He opened his sketch pad and gently pulled out the letter his mom had slipped inside. Unfolding it slowly, he recognized her handwriting. Neat, slightly slanted. "You belong in the sky just as much as anyone, Cairo. No matter how people look at you, you've earned that seat. You're not just flying for yourself, you're flying for everyone who's ever been told they couldn't." He didn't cry, but his eyes stung a little. He folded the letter carefully, slipped it back between the pages, and looked out the window like she'd told him. But deep in his stomach, a strange tightness began to form, as if something was coming. A new figure entered the gate area, a woman in a navy blue uniform, hair pulled tight, her stride sharp and decisive. Her name badge read J. Crowley. She didn't greet anyone, didn't smile, just surveyed the room like she was scanning for trouble. Cairo straightened in his seat as she walked closer. The tag on his backpack marked "Unaccompanied Minor" swung gently with each step. She zeroed in on it like a target. "You," she said, stopping in front of him. "Why are you sitting here alone?" Cairo blinked, then stood. "I'm going to California. Tech camp in Berkeley. Here's my boarding pass." She didn't even glance at it. She took it delicately like it was dirty, and then with one motion ripped it clean in half. "You'll wait here until we can verify who you really are," she said coldly. "I've seen enough fake passes to know when something's off." No questions, no checking the manifest. Just a judgment. Cairo froze. His hands still held the two torn halves like pieces of himself. And for the first time that day, he felt small, not because he was a kid, but because someone decided he didn't belong. The world didn't stop, but it tilted. Travelers moved around him. Announcements echoed through the speakers, wheels rolled across tile. But in Cairo's mind, everything had gone silent. Crowley stood over him, arms crossed, her voice sharp and clipped. "You're creating a disruption," she said, as if he had done something wrong. "My dad's already on the plane," Cairo managed, voice trembling. "His name is Malcolm Bennett." Something flickered in her expression but vanished just as fast. "Names don't matter without proper documentation," she said. Then she turned to a younger attendant nearby. "Call airport security. We may have a situation." The young man, Dylan, his badge red, froze. His eyes darted to Cairo, then to the shredded boarding pass. He hesitated, clearly unsure, but eventually tapped his headset and stepped away. Cairo sat back down, holding tight to the folded letter in his sketchbook like it was armor. His chest rose and fell too fast. The faces around him stayed silent. Some looked, most looked away. And that's when he realized being unseen is one thing, but being seen by and discarded is something else entirely. When the two security officers arrived, the air in Gate 34 thickened. One was a tall man with a shaved head, mirrored sunglasses still perched on his face despite being indoors. The other was younger, holding a tablet in one hand. They didn't rush, but their steady steps carried a weight that made people glance up without knowing why. "There he is," Crowley said, pointing at Cairo like he was an unclaimed item. Presented a suspicious boarding pass. No guardian. Got defensive when questioned. Cairo's hands trembled as he stood pulling out the torn ticket from his pocket. "She ripped it," he whispered. "I didn't do anything wrong." The older officer took the pieces, frowning as he examined them. The younger one scanned the orange tag on Cairo's backpack and started typing into his device. A few tense moments passed. Then a quiet, "There's a Malcolm Bennett and Cairo Bennett on the manifest. Checked in 35 minutes ago. Minor status confirmed. Clean entry." Crowley's posture shifted, but she didn't apologize. He didn't show ID, she insisted. But this time, no one nodded in agreement. Not the officers, not the bystanders. Especially not Cairo, who for the first time felt the tide begin to turn. Dylan stepped forward, voice hesitant but clear. "Ma'am, he did check in with me. I verified his documents personally. His ID matched the unaccompanied minor form. Everything was in order." Crowley spun toward him, eyes sharp. "Why didn't you say something earlier? I should have..." Dylan said quietly. I hesitated. "That's on me." The honesty in his voice cut through the noise like a blade. Around them, a few passengers stirred in their seats. A woman near the window slowly stood up. "I saw the whole thing," she said. The boy showed his pass. He wasn't wandering. She didn't even look at it before tearing it. Another voice followed, then a third. "This doesn't feel right." He wasn't doing anything. The tension that had blanketed the gate began to crack like thin ice. Cairo looked around, unsure if he should feel relief or more fear. But for once, the silence wasn't pushing him into the shadows. It was starting to work for him. People were finally seeing him not as a threat, but as a child wronged. He didn't want pity. He didn't even want an apology. He just wanted someone to finally say, "I see you, and what happened to you wasn't okay." Then came the voice that silenced the entire gate. "Is there a reason my son isn't on that plane?" It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It moved through the air like gravity, undeniable and calm. Malcolm Bennett stepped forward from beyond the security checkpoint, shoulders relaxed, gaze unwavering. No one stopped him. No one even thought to. He wasn't wearing a suit, didn't look like a CEO. Just a father in a slate gray jacket and quiet strength. Cairo turned, his eyes widening. "Dad," he breathed. Malcolm crossed the short distance to his son and crouched down to his level. He didn't speak right away, just looked at him. Then gently asked, "You all right?" Cairo nodded, but the way he held the torn ticket said otherwise. "She said it was fake," Cairo whispered. "She tore it before I could say anything." Malcolm's face didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He stood up, turned to Crowley, and asked calm as ever, "Did you scan his name?" I didn't get that far," she admitted. "Did you check the UM list? The barcode on his bag links to his manifest." "I didn't think I needed to," she muttered. "No," Malcolm said. "You didn't think, you assumed." Malcolm's voice wasn't angry, but it held a weight that forced the truth into the open. Crowley's confidence began to wither. She folded her arms tighter as if that could shield her from the clarity of the moment. But it couldn't, not when the facts were so loud. Dylan stepped in again, firmer now. He followed every rule, checked in early, his forms were clean. I flagged him as UM. There was no issue. Malcolm nodded once, then turned to the two security officers. So tell me, why was my son's ticket destroyed before a single question was asked? Neither of them had an answer, but the tension in their stance shifted from confrontation to discomfort. I want the security footage pulled, Malcolm said, from the moment he was stopped. Every word, every second. And I want a full report filed. Dylan tapped his headset. Already notifying the supervisor, sir. The woman by the window stepped closer. Your son, he was polite. He showed everything. She didn't even glance at it. Malcolm turned to her, offering the smallest nod. Thank you. And for the first time, Crowley's arms dropped to her sides. Her voice cracked. I didn't know who he was. That's the problem, Malcolm replied. It shouldn't matter. Moments later, the supervisor arrived, suit slightly wrinkled, breath short from rushing. He looked at the scene, at Cairo still clutching torn paper, at Crowley now pale and wordless. Mr. Bennett, he said quickly, we were just informed. I apologize for what happened. Malcolm didn't waste time. I want assurance that my son boards this flight without another hand raised against him. And I want the entire exchange preserved, reviewed and addressed professionally, not quietly. Yes, of course. His new ticket is being printed right now, the supervisor said, glancing toward Dylan. Cairo walked over to the window again. He stared at the plane waiting outside. His fingers traced the edges of the paper. He didn't speak, but everything about him said, I'm still carrying this. Quietly, he asked his father, why did she look at me like that? Malcolm exhaled slowly, struggling with the answer. She didn't see you, Kai. She saw what she wanted to. That's what some people do when they stop paying attention to truth. Cairo nodded, but the pain hadn't left his eyes. This wasn't just about a boarding pass. It was about being made to feel like you never had a right to board at all. Cairo sat quietly near the large glass windows, his new boarding pass clutched in one hand, still warm, but it didn't erase what had happened. Around him, the terminal had started to breathe again. People returned to their phones, their books, their routines. But for Cairo, nothing had returned to normal. Not yet. Dylan, the young attendant, approached and sat beside him. I'm sorry, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I should have spoken up sooner. I was standing right there and still. I froze. Cairo didn't answer right away. He just looked down at the floor. I didn't even know if I should speak, he admitted. It all happened so fast. But you held your ground, Dylan said. You stayed calm when most adults wouldn't have. Cairo offered a faint, tired smile. At the check-in desk, the supervisor was reviewing surveillance footage with the airport's tech staff. Behind them, Crowley stood, rigid eyes cast down at the polished floor. No one told her to be quiet. She simply had nothing left to defend. This wasn't just a moment anymore. It was a mirror. And everyone in that space had to decide whether they would look into it or pretend it never reflected them. Soon after, another flight attendant approached. She was older, maybe in her 40s, with warm eyes and a calm demeanor that instantly softened the air around her. Her name tag read Lauren. Hi, Cairo, she said, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. We're ready to board now. But before that, the captain would like to meet you if you are up for it. Cairo blinked. Really, Lauren smiled. Really? He's heard a lot about your dad, and now about you. Malcolm gave his son a gentle nod. Go ahead, I'll be right here. Cairo stood still, cautious but curious. He followed Lauren down the jetway backpack, still snug on his shoulders, steps hesitant but steady. The cockpit door opened. Inside, the captain rose from his seat, a warm grin on his face. Mr. Bennett, he said with exaggerated formality. Welcome aboard. Cairo chuckled. I'm just a passenger. Maybe, the captain replied, but you've already taught this airline more than we expected to learn today. As Cairo took in the controls and blinking lights, a sense of pride bloomed in his chest, not for what had happened, but for the way he had walked through it. He didn't win a battle, he endured it, and that meant something. After his visit to the cockpit, Cairo was escorted to seat 2A in first class. He looked around in awe, plush seats, wide windows, soft overhead lights. But still, he glanced up at Malcolm with hesitation. Do I have to sit here, he asked. I kinda like the wing seats better. Malcolm smiled, taking the seat next to him. Then we'll switch once we're in the air. But today you deserve to sit wherever you want. Flight attendant Lauren returned with 2 glasses of water and a small folded note. From the gate supervisor, she whispered. Malcolm unfolded it. We are reviewing all interactions at gate 34. I know an apology won't undo the harm, but we're committed to doing better from this moment forward. Dean Rosner. He slid the note into his jacket pocket without a word. Cairo turned to his father. Are you mad at her? He asked quietly. Malcolm paused. No. Why not? Because being angry is easy, Malcolm replied. Making sure it doesn't happen again. That's what matters. Cairo leaned back into the seat, still processing, but knowing deep down this wasn't over. It was just the beginning of something that needed to change. Outside the window, the plane began taxiing. The runway shimmered under the afternoon sun. Cairo leaned toward the glass face close and eyes searching. I think I see snow on the mountains, he said softly. Could be the Sierra Nevadas, Malcolm replied. Looks like someone spilled powdered sugar across the top. Cairo smiled, and for the first time since the gate, it reached his eyes. The pain hadn't disappeared, but something lighter had found its way in. He pulled out his sketchbook again, flipping to the page where his mother's letter had once rested. On a fresh page, he began to draw, not machines, not robots, but the airport gate. He drew Crowley behind the counter, not angry, not cruel, just tired. Then he drew himself sitting alone holding a torn ticket, and on the wide glass behind them, he wrote 2 words in bold block letters, be better. Not as revenge, not as punishment, but as a reminder to her, to himself, to everyone watching, that kindness isn't weakness and silence should never protect cruelty. This was how he fought back, not with noise, but with clarity. The cabin settled into stillness as the plane reached cruising altitude. Headphones clicked on, pages turned, conversations murmured low. But Cairo remained focused on his sketch pad, his pencil carving out memory with quiet precision. He wasn't drawing for sympathy. He was drawing to remember. Malcolm watched him, heart heavy and proud all at once. He could still see the look on Cairo's face when that ticket was ripped. Shock, without tears, confusion without words. It haunted him more than anger ever could. Cairo said softly, eyes still on the page. If I wasn't your son, would they have treated me worse? Malcolm didn't rush to answer. He looked out the window for a long beat. Maybe, he admitted, and that's what hurts the most. Cairo nodded, not surprised. I don't want her to lose everything, he added, voice low. I just want her to understand. Malcolm reached over, gently squeezing his son's hand. That's called strength, Kai. It's not about tearing people down. It's about teaching them why they were wrong and giving them the chance to grow. Cairo didn't respond. He just drew. And that in itself was the beginning of something powerful. The plane touched down gently in Oakland, the tires kissing the tarmac with a soft thud. Cairo felt the vibration beneath his feet and let out a slow breath, not from fear, but from the quiet exhaustion that only truth can bring. The kind that doesn't scream, just settles into your chest and stays. Flight attendant, Lauren returned, smiling warmly. Cairo, your escort is waiting at the gate. You ready? He nodded, adjusting his backpack. The new boarding pass was folded carefully in his sketchbook, but it wasn't what he'd remember. He would remember the silence, the stares, the torn ticket, and the way the world almost pretended not to see. At the gate, Malcolm crouched down one last time. 2 weeks, he said. I'll be back to pick you up. You're gonna love it out there. Cairo hesitated. I won't forget. Malcolm gave his shoulder a soft squeeze. Don't forget the hard parts. Let them teach you, not change you. As Cairo walked away with his escort, his orange tag swaying behind him, his spine was straighter now. He hadn't won a fight. He'd survived a moment that tried to erase him, and that was more powerful than most people would ever know. At Berkeley Tech Camp, the world felt different. There were no stares, no accusations, no one second-guessing his presence. Only tools, blueprints, curious kids, and the hum of invention. For once, Cairo was just Cairo, not a problem, not a disruption, just a boy with a mind wired for building and a heart trying to understand the world. He bonded quickly with a few others, nerdy, kind kids from all over the country. They didn't ask about the airport. He didn't offer it. It wasn't shame, it was self-protection. That story wasn't ready to be shared in pieces. But one night, as dorm lights dimmed and the hallway chatter faded, he sat by his bunk and opened his sketchbook. He turned to a clean page and began to draw. Not drones, not robots, but the gate, the moment, Crowley, himself. He drew her face as ordinary, not cruel, just unaware. And above her in thick pencil strokes, the same words he'd imagined on the plane, be better. He didn't draw it for her, he drew it for himself, as a promise, as a scar, as a soft rebellion against the kind of world that told him to shrink. Back in Oakland, Malcolm sat in his high-rise office overlooking the bay. The fog wrapped around the skyline like soft armor. But he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at a thick file on his desk marked Gate 34 Incident Review. It contained everything. Security footage, internal reports, Dylan's statement, Crowley's formal response, a summary of the conversations he'd had with executives across the company. Cairo's name wasn't on a single page, and yet every word had his shadow etched into it. Malcolm flipped through slowly, his jaw tight. He'd fought many battles in boardrooms, but this wasn't about leverage or market share. This was about the quiet violence of assumption and what it cost when left unchecked. At the end of the report, he signed off on a new internal initiative, mandatory training on unconscious bias, emotional de-escalation, improved youth passenger protocol. Underneath his signature, he added a handwritten line: accountability isn't punishment, it's reflection. This wasn't about firing someone. It was about forcing an entire system to stop, look, and say, we were wrong. Because his son deserved more than a new ticket. He deserved a world that wouldn't rip it up in the first place. Meanwhile, Crowley sat alone in a small HR conference room at the airport. She stared at the frosted glass door, the clock ticking so loud it felt like thunder. Her disciplinary notice was printed neatly in front of her, words clinical, unfeeling. She wasn't fired, not yet, but she knew the tide had turned. Her past evaluations were under review. Her previous interactions with unaccompanied minors were being quietly re-examined. She thought about Cairo, not his name, not who his father was, but his face. That small, stunned face that hadn't yelled, hadn't fought, hadn't even cried. He had just stood there and let the world do what it wanted. That was the part that haunted her. She didn't hate the boy. She hadn't even meant harm. But when the moment came, she had chosen power over pause, assumption over attention. And it had been so easy. That was what terrified her most. Her computer pinged. An email from corporate. She didn't open it. Not yet. For the first time in years, she wasn't sure she belonged in the uniform she'd worn like a badge of certainty. Because now certainty felt like the most dangerous thing she'd ever held. The camp ended with a small ceremony, no stage, no trophies. Just a circle of chairs, kids holding their final creations, and counselors praising their growth. Cairo stood quietly as his name was called. He received a certificate that read, Creative Resilience Award, for rising above and building anyway. He didn't smile big, just a small nod, a quiet thank you. The real award, he knew, was the feeling he carried now, a sturdiness that didn't need permission to stand tall. At the airport, Malcolm was waiting with a sign that read, Welcome back, Engineer Bennett. Cairo rolled his eyes, laughing. Really, Dad, too much. Malcolm grinned. Could have gone with CEO. They hugged, brief, firm, real. On the drive home, Cairo pulled out his sketchbook. The drawing was still there. Crowley? The window. The words. Do you think she remembers, he asked. I think it follows her, Malcolm replied. That's how change begins. Cairo didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because sometimes a torn ticket becomes a blueprint. And a boy who was once treated like a problem becomes a mirror the world can no longer ignore. 2 days after Cairo returned home, a cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail bearing the airline's logo. It wasn't a form letter. It wasn't from a department. It was personal. His name, Cairo Bennett, was handwritten in clean script across the front. He opened it slowly. Inside was a lifetime passenger priority card embossed with his name and a letter from the regional supervisor, Dear Cairo. We're not writing just to apologize, but to thank you. What happened to you should never have happened. Your presence, your grace has already sparked change within our organization. Because of you, more children will be seen, heard, and protected. We can't undo the past, but because of you, we're choosing to do better. With respect, Dean Rosner. Regional Supervisor Cairo ran his finger along the edge of the card, then tucked both the card and letter into the same box where he kept his mother's note and the remains of the torn ticket. Not as trophies, but as proof. Proof that even a small voice, when steady, can shake the walls of something too used to being quiet. That evening, Cairo sat out on the porch as the sun sank behind the rooftops, his sketchbook resting on his lap. The air was warm, quiet. A few cicadas droned in the trees. Beside him, Malcolm leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes gazing up at the early evening sky. Dad Caro asked softly, "Do you think someone like me will ever be able to move through the world without needing to prove they belong?" Malcolm didn't rush an answer. He exhaled through his nose as if weighing the pain in the question. Then he looked over and said, "I think every time someone like you refuses to disappear, it gets a little easier for the next person." Cairo nodded slowly. Then without a word, he flipped to a fresh page and began to draw again. This time he sketched himself not smaller than the world, but standing level with it. The airport behind him, the glass clean, the people looking not away, but at him, eyes open. He didn't draw guards or tickets or desks, just light coming through the window. And the words above it all, "See me." A week later, Malcolm attended an internal company meeting, not as a CEO, but as a father who refused to let the moment pass unchallenged. The room was full: department heads, training leaders, operations executives. No press, no ceremony, just accountability. He didn't bring statistics. He didn't need to. He brought Cairo's drawing. He held it up and spoke. This was drawn by a 12-year-old boy who had his ticket torn before his name was even checked. He didn't ask for a lawsuit. He didn't scream. He just asked to be seen. And we failed him. Silence settled like fog across the room. Then Malcolm added, "This isn't about embarrassment. It's about repair. Because if we only move when we're exposed, we're not leading, we're reacting." Afterward, a young woman from the training department approached him with tears in her eyes. "I used to be that kid," she whispered. "The one no one listened to." Malcolm nodded. "Then you'll know exactly how to train the ones coming next." Real change doesn't start with blame. It starts with memory. And now the memory belonged to all of them. In the weeks that followed, small changes began to ripple across airports nationwide. Posters were updated, training materials rewritten. New policies were introduced not just around protocol for unaccompanied minors, but around empathy, around what it means to pause before you assume, to see before you decide. At Gate 34, a small plaque was discreetly added above the agent desk. It read, "Every traveler carries more than a ticket. They carry history. See them." Crowley, after her suspension, chose not to return to her position, not because she was banned, but because for the first time she didn't feel like she had earned her way back. She took a different job, lower title, fewer eyes, but she carried a drawing copied from a sketch left anonymously in the break room. It was her behind the desk. And on the window, "Be better." She didn't frame it, she didn't hang it, she just kept it in her locker, folded, soft around the edges. A reminder that even when the noise quiets down, the lesson must not. Because sometimes redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about carrying it with enough humility to never repeat it. On the last night of summer, Cairo sat by his window sketchbook balanced on his knees. Outside, the world was still, street lights, blinking shadows stretching. His parents had gone to bed, but he wasn't tired. He turned to the final page of his sketchbook, and for the first time he drew himself smiling. Not because the world was fixed, not because everything had been made fair, but because he now understood something most people take years to learn. You don't have to be loud to be heard. You don't have to be angry to demand justice. You just have to refuse to vanish. As he closed the book, a small smile tugged at his lips. He wasn't just a passenger anymore, not just a boy with a torn ticket. He was the spark that made a system look inward. And somewhere out there, maybe at Gate 34, maybe in a break room, maybe in the heart of another kid who just wanted to be seen, that spark had caught. And from now on, the sky would know his name. Silence doesn't protect, it permits. This story reminds us that injustice rarely arrives with warning. Sometimes it wears a uniform, sometimes it stands behind a desk, and too often it hides behind silence. But real change doesn't come from outrage alone. It comes from the quiet courage of those who choose to speak up. Every child deserves to feel safe, seen, and believed. And every system must be challenged until that truth is not the exception, but the rule.